The year was 1997. December, cold and unforgiving, had already settled over the Midwest. Flight 307, a red-eye from Chicago to Seattle, was routine, or at least it began that way. Inside the dimly lit cabin, the hum of the engines was a hypnotic lullaby, a steady thrum against the backdrop of a late-night journey. Among the weary travelers was Arthur Jenkins. He was an unassuming man, a middle-aged accountant on what he believed would be a predictable business trip. He'd settled into his window seat in economy, row 23F, shortly after boarding. The seat beside him remained empty. He'd exchanged polite, brief nods with the woman across the aisle, then buried his attention in a paperback novel, a thriller, fittingly enough. The flight ascended without incident, reaching its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed further, and most passengers drifted into a fitful sleep. Arthur, however, found his thoughts restless. The book wasn't holding his interest as he'd hoped. He glanced at his watch, just past 2 a.m. Central Time. Outside, a vast, inky blackness stretched, broken only by the occasional pinprick of a distant star. Feeling a familiar stiffness in his legs, Arthur decided a short walk might help. He carefully unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed up from his seat, and stretched his back with a quiet groan. No one paid him any mind. It was a common occurrence on long flights. He took a moment, then began to move, slowly making his way down the narrow aisle. His destination, he thought, was simply the rear galley, perhaps for a glass of water, or just to stretch his legs for a few more minutes before returning to his seat. He walked past rows of sleeping passengers, their faces obscured by shadows, past the lavatories, past the emergency exits at the rear of the cabin. A flight attendant, busy with paperwork in the galley, offered a fleeting smile. Arthur returned it, a silent acknowledgement. He continued for a few more steps, disappearing around the corner, into the small, functional space of the aft galley and the adjacent lavatories. He was there, and then he wasn't. The flight continued its monotonous journey through the night sky. The cabin crew went about their duties. Passengers continued to sleep or stare blankly at the seat backs in front of them. The hours passed. Slowly, imperceptibly, the first hints of dawn began to paint the horizon in hues of bruised purple and grey. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, the cabin lights brightened and the crew prepared for landing. It was only then, as the passengers stirred and began to gather their belongings, that the first subtle anomaly was noted. Arthur Jenkins' seat, 23F, remained occupied only by his open paperback and a rumpled blanket. His carry-on bag was still stowed beneath the seat in front of him, but Arthur himself was nowhere to be seen. At first, the flight attendant assumed he was simply in one of the lavatories, perhaps taking his time. But as the landing announcement was made, and then the seatbelt sign illuminated for the final time, a quick check revealed all lavatories were empty. The flight attendants conferred, a flicker of concern crossing their faces. They performed a discreet, internal scan of the entire cabin, from front to back, including the overhead bins. No Arthur Jenkins. The plane touched down smoothly, taxied to the gate, and the jet bridge extended. Still, no sign. The captain was quietly informed. Ground crew and airport security were immediately alerted, but the operation remained low-key, aiming to avoid panic among disembarking passengers. Once the last passenger had left, an exhaustive search began. Every single seat was checked, every overhead compartment. The lavatories were meticulously examined, their small compartments and service panels scrutinized. The galleys were dismantled. Even the cargo hold, accessible from the main cabin via a small hatch, was thoroughly swept. Every nook, every cranny, every potential hiding spot within the confined space of a Boeing 737 was explored. Nothing. Arthur Jenkins had simply vanished. His wallet was found in his carry-on bag. His identification, credit cards, and a significant amount of cash were all accounted for. There was no suicide note, no indication of foul play on his person or among his belongings. Security footage from Chicago O'Hare showed Arthur Jenkins boarding the flight, looking calm and unremarkable. He scanned his ticket, walked down the jet bridge, and entered the aircraft. He was seen again on the plane by the flight attendant just before he walked to the back. But after that fleeting moment in the aft galley, there was no record, no witness, no trace of him ever again. The plane's doors and emergency exits were all confirmed to have been secured and sealed throughout the entire flight. There was no sudden depressurization event, no indication of a breach in the fuselage. The cockpit crew reported a completely uneventful flight. The idea of him somehow falling out of the plane was immediately dismissed as an impossibility without a catastrophic structural failure, which simply did not occur. Every inch of that aircraft was meticulously scoured. Nothing. The investigation widened. Law enforcement interviewed Arthur's family, friends, and colleagues. They found no enemies, no mounting debts, no secret life, no reason for him to orchestrate his own disappearance. He was a creature of habit, a man firmly rooted in his ordinary life. The notion of a stowaway assisting him was improbable. A person cannot simply open an aircraft door at cruising altitude without specialized knowledge and tools, let alone without being detected. Could he have voluntarily disappeared, somehow creating a new life for himself? The evidence contradicted this at every turn. His passport, money, and personal effects were all left behind. And even if he wanted to disappear, how did he leave the sealed environment of an airplane at 35,000 feet? The laws of physics and the design of the aircraft seemed to make such an act utterly impossible. Theories, wild and unsettling, began to circulate. Some whispered of a spontaneous human combustion, an event so bizarre it left no residue. Others suggested a kind of quantum shift, a momentary glitch in reality where a person could simply cease to exist. More pragmatic, though equally bewildered, investigators posited an elaborate, undetected act of foul play, a murder and disposal so flawless it left absolutely no trace. But the question lingered, cold and sharp. How do you vanish from a sealed metal tube miles above the earth? To this day, the case of Arthur Jenkins remains an open file, a phantom in the annals of unexplained disappearances. His family never received closure. The airline was left with an impossible mystery. No body was ever recovered. No explanation ever surfaced. Arthur Jenkins, a man who merely walked to the back of a plane for a glass of water, simply ceased to be. He became a void, a chilling question mark, hanging in the empty space where a person once was. A man who boarded a flight and never truly landed.